achieving a new balance on the global stage. The 21st St. Petersburg International Economic Forum has just wrapped up. Russian President Vladimir Putin took part in several sessions, and as expected, the Paris Climate Accord was a hot topic.
If we look at exactly what these Paris agreements are, in general, they are a framework document. Everything they contain is up to national governments to decide. There are no obligatory demands. All countries make independent decisions.
Just 2 days ago, in a made-for-TV moment broadcast across the country, U.S. President Donald Trump finally revealed his decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States to the exclusive benefit of other countries.
While other world leaders have strongly condemned President Trump's decision to abandon the deal, Russian President Putin said he won't judge this and called for cooperation. The global stage is built on the shifting sands of the ever-changing priorities of individual countries. Climate change and globalization are just part of a wide gamut of issues emerging countries like China and Russia need to address.
Hello and welcome to our special program jointly presented to you by CGTN and NBC News on the current stage of globalization. We are broadcasting to you from St. Petersburg in Russia. I'm Tian Wei.
And I'm Keir Simmons from NBC News, a correspondent based in London but reporting around the world, as do you, Wei.
Yes, indeed. I am based in Beijing, but now so glad to be joined by you here on our special program.
It's a great
honor. The world
honor.
is changing so fast.
It's an extraordinary time.
Every day there are new challenges and new opportunities. How about that in St. Petersburg?
Well, how about that? I think you can just go through the list of seismic changes that we've seen around the globe. Just in the last year, the election of President Trump, just in the last 48 hours, President Trump deciding to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. We've seen President Xi go to Davos, the heart of the liberal West, if you like, and present himself, perhaps he didn't say that this is what he was doing, as the leader of globalization. These are incredible times.
It is incredible time. The election of President Trump as the U.S. president, Brexit as well. Meanwhile, some people feel being left out as a part of the globalization, and they try to make their voice heard through political elections. All of this is making our world change, and that is why we are here to bring this special program on globalization and us. And sitting with us here are two gentlemen who's going to tell us about how it's influencing their lives and their work.
That's right. So first we have Siegfried Wolf, who's from Russia Machines, a very experienced chairman of many, many years. And why don't you introduce our other guests there?
Yes. She's Sitao, the chief economist of Deloitte China, working in Europe and China over the years. It's such a great pleasure to have both of you. I would like to start by letting my colleague ask the first set of questions, and I will follow up on that.
Okay, great. Well, listen, Siegfried, let's begin by asking you, because you are a businessman, you are dealing with infrastructure. Are you seeing changes? Because there's so much politics, there's so much talk on the surface. Is it all talk, or do you see real changes happening in terms of where people are investing, where you think the business is going? Is the world really changing?
The world is really changing, and I think you raised a couple of points. Globalization is there if you want it, yes or no, and we have to deal with. And on the other hand, big countries, NAFTA region, European region, Asia, they want to protect a little bit their market as well. And you raised Mr. Trump. I think he gave us a clear to think about. He said America first. That means he would like to protect his region. And if you hear what Madame Merkel is saying just recently, okay, we have to rethink our position in Europe once more. Yeah? That means it's changing, it's a shift, yeah? And I feel very sorry for you coming from Great Britain with this Brexit story, and we really forget a little bit what was the reason why Brexit was even decided by the people in Great Britain. And I think going forward and pressing our European style, and you have to pay, you have to do, we have to take in mind that the financial market is driven mainly out of Great Britain. That means what and where we are doing our clearance of our euro money. And it's a lot of decisions.
There are a lot of changes going on, and as a result, there could be a lot of possibilities. It seems Russia is looking for its own identity, while the rest of the world are looking for new order, some say. Is it as serious as that, Mr. Xu?
Yeah, Russia is in a search of new identity. I think we all know that. This is a relatively young country. I think in this forum, particularly in the past few years, we are seeing a new dimension really represented by emerging market, China, India. I think that's actually helping Russia in a way find its new identity.
But what about China at this very crossroad?
I think China has many roles to play. As you said in the very first beginning, infrastructure. Infrastructure sounds very important, but we all know that for investors, it's difficult to make money from that. I think the China's experience is, before, let's not talk about ideology. Good infrastructure is a precondition for sustainable economic growth. So that's a lesson from China. And China is trying to replicate that experience in some other countries.
I mean, let's talk about the two pictures, if you like. One way to describe it. And one way to describe it is that in the West, you have a large section of the population who feel left behind by globalization. And that has caused earthquakes in those democratic countries. And on the other hand, you have China with the One Belt, One Road policy. And that policy is being talked about as the biggest infrastructure investment since the Marshall Plan. So are those two things, aside from the normal heartbeat of business, where we have seen the rise of Asia and China over a prolonged period, are those two things having a seismic change on the economics and business that you are seeing?
Well, I hope what you have described, this two trend, right? When you have people who are being left behind in developed countries, at the same time China is unveiling this initiative. I hope we find some common background. This is how I see it. One Belt, One Road is not just infrastructure investment. Maybe we should view that as China's commitment, reinforced commitment for economic integration with other countries and trade liberalization. And perhaps China can get developed countries involved, whether UK, United States, Italy, France, Germany, Austria. And that way, we can actually mitigate this tremendous geopolitical risk in this vast area. So maybe we can create some convergence between emerging market and developed world.
China just hosted its Belt and Road Initiative Summit earlier, and many people are coming, and there seems to be a lot of interest, and yet, what about action? I mean, China extended its hand and saying, this is going to be a win-win situation, but will others be also willing to participate?
We were talking just before about creating Russia. It's a pretty new development. And I start here with right, that means with law, with getting very clearly that if you own something that you get as well legal right. And there I see a lot of changes in Russia, especially with respect, because before everything was arbitration in London, British law, and we do a lot here, and I see a lot positive trend in protecting ownership here in Russia. On the other hand, I think...
Let's just point out that the Russian economy has seen a substantial downturn over many years and is only beginning to return around after that.
Yeah, that means we saw as well the sanction policy, and we have to take, especially sanctions are not good for anyone. Sanctions are ending up with counter-sanctions, and this was, I think, wrong. If you really see, it didn't help too much. The economy in Russia is still growing. This year we have 2 to 3% growth. It's nothing compared with China, but we get a clear stabilization. But on the other hand, for industry and for businessmen, it's very important in what markets do you go. And if I see the purchase power compared with capita per head, Russia is still leading, let's say, nearly double. Russia has about $18,000 per income per head, based on raw material. China is about 12. So in future we have to look as well, where do we sell? To produce is one story, but in what market we are going to sell, and this is something where we have to be very careful how we shape those markets.
So do you look at One Belt, One Road and think, there's a great place to make money?
No, at the end of the day, we have to think as well, you cannot concentrate just on One Belt, One Road. Yeah? I see that the world is functioning a little bit different. Yeah? It means in the next couple of years, look at the Eurasia region, what the Russian government and Mr. Putin tried to support, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit more connected, and I think we have to, and you raised the point about this climate story, we have to be very careful. At the end, we have just one universe, and we have the responsibility to take care on it. Yeah?
This is a great point, because I want to pick up that point. What we are talking about here is an overall concept of how we should look at the world at this critical juncture. Are we going to see it as a zero-sum game? If you gain, I will lose? Or are we going to see it at this critical juncture, everybody has the opportunity? Even about the Belt and Road and the Eurasian Economic Corridor. Some say, Mr. Xu, it's competition between China and Russia. Some say, well, as Mr. Simons earlier mentioned, it could be actually, Mr. Wolf earlier mentioned, actually it could be complementary. So what exactly is the worldview from your perspective that business community these days should
it doesn't have to be, this binary scenario, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with competition, and quite often competition actually bring the best from both countries, from both cities, right? New York competing with London, so that's good for both cities. There's nothing wrong with competition, but I do think China-Russia are economic complementary. China is going to remain the biggest provider of savings, right? And that's given. China still enjoys this demographic dividend. Russia needs more population. China cannot have too much land for agriculture. It just doesn't make economic sense. So you see all this. That's, these two countries have immense room for collaboration.
And let's, though, bring back some, if you like, as they say, some real politic to this as well. I mean,
we're going to begin that.
Yeah, America is still a huge economy.
Yeah.
It has a history of reinventing itself and pulling itself economically through every crisis it's faced in recent memory. And China owns an enormous amount of US dollars. These economies are connected.
Yeah.
And the American view about China, largely held, is that China has fixed its exchange rate and has not been open to investment. Certainly not to imports in the way that other countries are. So there is always politics here, and we've got to be careful, I think, not to just run away with the idea that, if you like, America is finished and China is the next is the next, biggest power in the world, because that may not be the case, right?
No. I don't think we should just sell America short. I think U.S. economy is still extraordinarily robust. Economy actually is doing well. I mean, stock market all-time high. Notwithstanding all politics, I do think U.S. system is resilient. So, and as you said, there is a politics between China and the United States. Facts and the myths. Fixed exchange rate, I don't think that's true. China doesn't have a fixed exchange rate. China has managed the float, right?
That's not what President Trump thinks.
Right, manage the float. You manage float, right? You manage, I mean, it's not like sterling, but it's managed float. Market access, I think that's a good point. I think U.S. is...
You'd accept that, would you? There could be better market access to China.
U.S. is pushing China extremely hard. Right now, we're in the middle of a 100-day progress. And China has made some concessions. For example, rating agency, insurance company, credit card. I think more will be done. Actually, that would be good for Chinese consumers, in my opinion.
There is a critical issue here. The reason why we talk about climate change, why we talk about globalization, is not because these are separate concepts, but rather they work with one another. Yep. Economy and trade as well. So I want to ask you, because of the changes of the climate deal, as U.S. formally has announced to withdraw, is the lack of moral leadership necessarily going to impact the United States when it comes to its power to do business elsewhere in the world? I do want you, Mr. Wolf, to pick up on that, and then Mr. Xu.
But we were talking about competition, and we have to think very carefully
We were talking about competition and collaboration.
Yeah, and cooperation, but the point is you have to play on an equal playing field. Yeah? We have World Trade Organization where it clearly says where I get subsidies, where I don't get. Yeah? And we have to be very careful what we are going to do. I think as well we have to develop other countries as well, because at the end of the day industry is living from exports. Yeah?
So what exactly is your point, Mr. Wolf?
My point is mainly that we cannot go on a global war. Yeah? That means we have to respect as well tax systems. We have to respect attractions where I'm going to invest. Yeah? And if I see that Mr. Trump is now saying I reduce my tax regime completely, then we kill a lot of countries around, which are now very attractive that people are going to invest. And this is something where I feel we have to be careful and have to take care as well on the poor regions.
Mr. Wolf is certainly an internationalist. What about you, Mr. Xu?
Yeah, I think you made a very good point, because much of the soft power in the United States, I would say less in this respect towards a global system. So what you have said is absolutely true. I think this is an unfortunate development, but the issue is what should other countries do? For example, China. I think China should continue her path on energy reform. I think China made that very clear. So in fact, much already being done. This is all driven by domestic needs. So I think we are going to see a lot of progress. In fact, I know you know this better than I do. Electric vehicles and hybrid will take off in a major way in China.
Yeah, and here we have to think as well from where the electricity is coming. We are completely against nuclear power, and I think we have to be very careful what is the total balance of energy, from where do we get it. Do we at one hand, even if you say electric vehicle is the messiah at the time being, but if you see the total calculation of CO2 emission from producing a battery and recycling a battery and the life cycle of a car compared to normal combustion vehicle, I think the balance of a normal combustion engine based on Euro 6 is still better than an electric vehicle, and we didn't answer where do we get the energy from.
The answer, the frankly, I guess in a sense obvious answer that we're coming to here is that politics does affect economics and business. It affects it profoundly. And I, honestly, that reflects not just, of course, though, on President Trump, it reflects on President Putin, who has made some political moves that have led to the sanctions, for example, the situation in Ukraine. And in China, the political situation continues to see the Chinese middle class pushing for change and wanting reform. Again, a challenge for the Chinese Communist Party. So every country that we're talking about has its own politics. Sometimes I think people forget that. They forget that every government is trying to manage the aspirations, sometimes prejudices, and demands of its own population.
But should we not be, let's say, very correct? Ukraine, the situation is the biggest issue what we feel now in Europe. Yeah? The Ukrainian issue isn't solved at the time being, but we have to say very clearly the situation that the Western world was making a lot of pressure to the Russian
You're talking
government.
about the expansion of NATO,
yeah,
the expansion of the European Union.
It was already a full direction when we had the Olympic Games here in Russia.
Right.
We got, or Russia got the Olympic Games. They did not win in the roulette. They got it by a commission. Yeah? Why these people haven't decided at those days earlier, same what we had in China as well.
It's so interesting though, isn't it? Because the question really is, and we've all heard the Russian government's argument, which is simply put, that the West took advantage of Russia's weakness, tried to expand NATO, didn't honour a pledge to bring Russia into NATO, just pushed towards Russia's borders in a threatening way.
Yeah.
But does that justify President Trump's reaction in Ukraine? Because many people would question whether it really does.
But we have to,
and of course, it's caused businessmen like you a real problem.
But we have to think this thing to the end. Yeah? That means, was it not the Western world who made the decision to Ukraine? Yeah? Please decide, would you go to Eurasia region or would you come back to the European, to the EU? It means it was the Western world who pressed as well a decision towards the Ukraine. And now then we had this Minsk agreements, and nobody
Which
is
a
willing.
failure.
Yeah, and
right.
Nobody is willing to fulfill.
And Wei wants to ask a question.
But a lot of things go with the same logic. Earlier you talked about reforms. Are we really talking about real reform? What does it take from your perspective?
Real reform is difficult. That's against.
I heard alongside from
No,
you,
that's
by the
against
way.
human nature. So, very often in most countries, you don't have reform unless you have crisis. It's just really human
We got
nature.
crisis, don't we?
We don't have, depending how you define crisis, right? So, for example, in Russia, you may say this is a crisis, but the economy is actually recovering, the economy is on demand, stock market is doing well, currency is stabilizing. Many people think currency is undervalued. You look at China, I think the government is trying to reform, but it's difficult just to accept slow growth.
What you don't want, I imagine, if you are a businessman in China, is to see the political situation start to damage your business. There's always a risk of that. That's one thing. And the second thing I'd like to hear your view on is that the good thing about a democracy is it allows people to vent their anger and to get their feelings out there. The danger with a country that isn't democratic enough is that at some point the population rebel and it causes a real crisis.
Yeah. So, I mean, just on political risk, I think Chinese business community viewing Russia actually in a more favorable way, because right now, at least at the highest level, both countries, they have created a certain framework for direct investment, portfolio investment, so on and so forth, right? There are several mechanisms, and to give you an example, there is actually a fund, 50-50, put out by both Russian and Chinese government. Now the difficulty is, I think right now we have a fight for capital globally. In the end, business people they are rational human beings. They go where the return is higher. So I actually think right now there's a movement globally on tax cut So I hope both China and Russia can take bolder steps in embracing supply side reform.
Talking about policies,
Yeah.
one thing is very important. Can we assume one size fits all? You talk about the tax cut.
No.
You talk about political system.
I never said
And
one size
will
fits all.
that be able to work in all economies? That's one question. The other question related to it is how politics these days are nurturing or going the other way around towards the better economy that we are trying to build. And we should build urgently. I think that's our very critical questions.
But based on the relation Russia and China, I have to say that China participated a lot on the crisis between Russia and Europe. It's for saying the Russian banner has an eagle with two heads. Yeah? I was always saying one head could and should look to Asia, and the other should really look backward to Europe. Yeah? But we have to think as well, based on this, what you are saying, to this political problem. In Europe, think about we have a couple of 100 million people which are, let's say, called refugees. Yeah? And this, in my mind, you don't have this in China, we don't have this in America, because there is just a little bit a minority what is taken there. But this will be as well one of the biggest situations which we have to overcome. So for that, we have to think very clearly, and coming back once more, how we support those countries where people don't feel happy, where people don't see any direction in their home country, how we can do, how we can support, how we can invest there, that people have, let's say, at least the possibility to do something in their own country where they are from.
And final point, I do want to have Mr. Xu to jump in here. Is it really going to be an issue about international governance, or this is something that the business community and civil societies will be able to handle
I
together?
think everyone has a role to play. Again, just in the beginning, we talked about infrastructure. It's not just going to be totally driven by the Chinese government. It's going to involve multinationals like you. It's going to involve developed world. It's going to involve NGOs. I mean, everyone has a role to play.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Absolutely.
Really interesting.
And also fascinating conversation between all of us.
I very much like in this current climate where there is a lot of hostility and a lot of shouting across the borders, to get together a group of people and actually have a conversation and exchange ideas without it needing to be leading to conflict, frankly.
Sensible people sitting with us today, and it's a great pleasure to work with my colleague Keir, coming from NBC
It's
News.
been an honor to be with you guys, Wayne.
Okay, thank you.
Sitao.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Wolf, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
thank you, really appreciate it. And with that, we're coming to our special program, a collaboration project between CGTN and NBC News. I'm Tian Wei.
And I'm Keir Simmons of NBC News.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.